I'd like to look at Mr. Bruff's language in the Moonstone in comparison with the other narrators. We know that Wilkie Collins trained as a lawyer, but he didn't practice as a lawyer. It would be interesting to see if he has Mr. Bruff using any specific terms of art, or if he has Mr. Bruff making any comments about being a lawyer that might give us some window into how Wilkie Collins felt about the legal profession. Mr. Bruff is not an obvious suspect in the theft of the Moonstone. Because of his profession, his narrative is given a lot of weight. But his narrative is actually very short, as is clear from the chart in the upper left-hand corner. Mr. Bruff is presented as rather Spartan and elderly, and he likes to gather his circumstantial evidence via interview with people, and here he's interviewing Miss Clack. It seems like he's disappointing Miss Clack because he's more skeptical of Mr. Ablewhite. Is there anything in Bruff's language that would suggest that he is different from the other narrators? We can see on the surface that he's very different from Miss Clack. However, using comparative stylometric analysis, which is on the lower right-hand corner of this slide, we can see that a grouping emerges: Bruff, Betteridge, and Blake, and Clack at the outer limit of this group. In contrast, the people who are further away, Jennings, Candy, and Cuff. Is this borne out in other analyses? Out of all the characters in the Moonstone, there's one that emerges as Mr. Bruff's counterpart, and that is Mr. Cuff or Sergeant Cuff. The names are clearly related, and Dickens liked to play with names like this. Sergeant Cuff, as the police detective, had a lot of agency. He was dynamic, but he didn't have the evidence. In contrast, the lawyer, Mr. Bruff, the elderly man, had the information, but he didn't have a lot of agency. At the end of the book, Mr. Murthwaite congratulates Mr. Bruff and said, "I told you you would find it out for yourself, Mr. Bruff, if only I gave you a fair chance." Well, let's look at Mr. Bruff's language, particularly the pronouns. Interestingly, Bruff does not come out as clinical and detached according to the ratio of male to female pronouns. The person who does is Mr. Cuff. In contrast, Mr. Bruff seems a lot like the other narrators. Further investigation into Bruff's language can consider the frequency of adverb usage, and here it's somewhat surprising all the narratives come out about the same. Clack is at the higher end of the values, and Candy is at the bottom end. Bruff is kind of in the middle. The genre categorizer really was quite accurate and identifies Bruff as something of a literary artist. In contrast, someone like Clack is coming out somewhere between hobbies and religion, which is very clear on the chart on the right-hand side. Mr. Bruff does use some distinctive language, such as of and I. These formal words were no doubt detected by the genre categorizer. He also makes some references to his position as a lawyer. He uses the word position, and he uses office. Also scanning through the text, he's concerned about marriage, particularly as it involves legal issues between two families. I think Wilkie Collins moved away from specific legal language in the book as not to bore his readers, and I think he uses some subtle humor against lawyers in a few places. A good example is said by Mr. Blake. "Mr. Bruff, you have no more imagination than a cow." "A cow is a very useful animal, Mr. Blake," said the lawyer. I think this might be a hint of how Wilkie Collins viewed the legal profession and why he wanted to be a novelist rather than a lawyer.